Welcome back to another episode of Preacher in the Hat. I'm Eric. If you were watching on video today, and apologize, those are audio only, but Derek and I have found yet another thing in life that we have to split or share. And today it is a camera shot.
Thank you, Mr. Producer. We appreciate it.
Well, we're used to this.
Yeah, but we've been doing that. We've been sharing all of our lives. So what's sharing a camera shot?
When you shared Christmas presents and rooms and a car.
Christmas presents, huh?
I mean, we got stuff that was like bought
that was
together.
for both of us, that sort of
We
thing.
didn't have to
it wasn't
split Christmas presents.
It's just making the point that,
We shared a lot. We were roommates in college.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff. So
Shared a car.
That's what
all
Derek
through
said.
college. I'm sorry, you already said that. Yeah.
So we're used to it, so we'll share a camera shot for today. But the reason we're sharing a camera shot is because we have our second ever guest inside the studio with us today. Miss Tina Sumpter claps inside the studio. Yeah.
Our producer's even clapping.
Yeah, he should be because it's his wife. Tina, we are super glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Tina goes to church with us, among a whole lot of other things that she does. One of which being she has a women's ministry titled officially
Radiant Women.
Radiant Women. So head on out to www.tinasumpter.com.
Yeah.
Go out there. She has a super awesome women's devotional through Seasons of Beauty.
Yeah, on Ecclesiastes.
On the book of Ecclesiastes.
Not the most popular book.
Hey, that's why you need to touch on that. And make sure you're. We'll get her linked in the video if you're watching on Facebook. Go out there, like her Facebook page. She's on Instagram and stuff, I think, as well.
I am.
Yeah, and you also do a weekly newsletter we do, right?
It's called the Radiant Devotion.
Yeah, awesome. You can find that on her website, like I mentioned, tinasumpter.com. So
cool.
Super glad to have you in with us. And we talked some last week, or I should say we started talking towards the end about attachment. And so that's what we kind of want to dive into today. An interesting... I would say the way we talked about attachment is kind of an interesting, not twist on it, but it's not the way you often hear attachment talked about. And we got some cool background on that we want to get into today. Yeah. So let's do it.
Cool. Let's do it. Well, kind of the way it kicked off actually was the 4-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, your 4-year-olds, and Nate last week, your son, Eric. We was kicking off and talking about what he said to you when he put his hand on your shoulder and said, "Dad, I'm going to always love you," something like that. And just like God always loves us.
That's exactly
so
right.
There you have it. What a profound theological statement he made. And we said, Tina, and to the rest of you, we said last week that it's interesting. Jesus said, "Be like children." So children can teach us some things about relationship with God because of their simple understanding of what that looks like to them. And then they help us. We tend to complicate it sometimes. But I thought in that moment, really, actually, he made such a statement of attachment, not just to you, Eric, as his father, but also to God the Father.
Yeah.
He understood that. There's more talk these days, and Tina, you and I talked about this some recently, is about attachment and how it impacts our lives and how it impacts our relationships, not only with God, but with other people. And so we kind of thought it'd be kind of cool to have you come and talk to us because you and I both work in a field where you in a different field from me, although we do some things the same, like prisons and stuff like that occasionally, but as a counselor, as a professional counselor, Christian counselor, you two meet people who have a lot of problems when it comes to attachment, and I do too.
Right.
And so on the negative side, those are called attachment disorders and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to focus on the disorders tonight. We want to talk about stories of in a positive way to kind of piggyback on Nate and Eric and what we talked about last week. So you and I talked a little bit today, even though we didn't script anything. We just kind of said, let's go story form. Go story form. What's our positive story about attachment? And you went right to a story I knew something about, but this piece I didn't know about.
Right.
And so talk to us about it.
Well, it's my favorite attachment story. It's the story of our adoption of Jenna Hope, our daughter.
And Jenna Hope is how old now?
So Jenna Hope is almost 19.
Wow.
Yeah. And when we got her, she was almost 1. So this was 18 years ago.
Yeah.
But even before that, it was like a 7-year adoption journey for us.
Wow. 7.
Yeah. And in our case, it was really about, we didn't have the finances.
Okay, yeah.
And we were solely dependent on God to provide for us to move forward.
That's a good reason for it to take 7 years.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. An understandable reason, too,
100%.
by the way.
But over that 7 years, that means I had 7 years to be praying for Jenna Hope. And we had already named her, so I really was praying for her by name.
Oh,
But
really?
for
So
7
you had her
years-
name a while ahead of time, huh?
Yeah. But I promise you, like, I was so attached to her. Like, I didn't know you could miss somebody that you never met yet.
Yeah.
Wasn't even born.
Yeah, and I didn't know, is she born yet?
Right.
Always wondering. But anyway, so eventually God provided and we got to adopt her. But in that time, I read up on attachment and wasn't even a counselor yet at that time. It was just an interest. But the adoption agencies wisely have you read up on that stuff. And so I was learning so much about how healthy attachment forms and knowing that my child wasn't getting those things. So I began to pray quite creatively. My friends know this about me. I can go like crazy and pray so many details. And so that's what I did. And I prayed. One of the big things I prayed, I wanted her to already kind of know us. So I started praying God would give her dreams of us.
Wow.
And I know some people just tuned me out because that sounds kooky. But I did. I dreamed that she would see us and hear us and feel us and smell us, like feel what it's like to be held by us, so that when she actually met us, she would be attached. So when we got there,
That's pretty cool.
Got where?
China, thank you. Yeah. So Jenna Hope was born in China. And we were in China. We were one of 5 families from the U.S. traveling together for 2 weeks throughout China. And they tell you up front to just expect certain things. Expect that because your child hasn't had the opportunity to form healthy attachments, that certain things are not going to happen. Like they're probably not going to cry.
Oh.
Which is interesting if you don't know much about attachment, that healthy kids cry. That's a sign of healthy attachment because they recognize their needs and they can communicate about it.
Oh.
So before you, as you're going over there, was it already set in stone, or was it something that, like, if something went over there and it didn't go well, then you may not go through with the adoption or something like that? So this was already done.
It was done.
Okay.
It's interesting what they do with China, and this was 18 years ago, but at least at that time, they send you a picture of a child and say, "Do you want this child?" And you have to say yes or no.
Wow.
I was like, of course. Yes, of course I want this child. So yeah, it was already set. And then you go over there and you do a lot of formalities, tons of formalities.
For the 2-week period.
It's 2 weeks. Literally, you go from office to office throughout a couple different states,
So
provinces.
you had a picture of her. How long before you got there?
That's exactly okay.
A couple of weeks.
Couple weeks.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, when you get your picture, you're told in advance, like, you're ready to get on the plane.
Okay, so then my next question was in that 2 weeks, when did you meet her?
Yeah.
Well, they expect that you'll get there and get the baby that day if you want.
Okay,
Like, they set the day. We decided to go a couple days early to get our bearings and jet lag and all that kind of thing. But yeah, as soon as they can get that baby in your arms, they're going to put that baby in your arms.
Okay.
So, but how soon in the 7-year waiting period prior to that did you start praying this stuff about attachment? Do you remember?
Pretty early.
Pretty early.
I mean, I remember that for years I was praying these things.
For years. Gotcha.
I remember one of my big fears at the time was that, in China, and at that time at least, the babies would be abandoned. I know we hate that word. It's a painful word, but that's really what happened. And my fear was that she was going to get cold. And so I could imagine her somewhere in China, abandoned and alone and cold and crying. And so I just prayed over and over, Lord, please don't let her get cold. Please send somebody to bring her inside if she's left in the cold. Like I just prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed.
Yeah.
Got to China and like it's subtropical over there.
Whoops.
She was dressed in the thickest clothes. She looked like a little Eskimo and couldn't move. It's like, well, Lord answered that prayer.
Yeah, for sure.
I heard that. It's pretty cool. So then in that 2-week period, you met her and you were connected to her. What was that like in terms of attachment? What did you know right away?
No, right away. What?
That she was connected to you.
I want to go back, or I want you to like start from, because I think we were very eager to ask questions.
I'm loving it.
And I want to hear, like, let's go with the story of when you first saw. Like, can you go kind of with that and what
That's
that was
cool.
like,
That's
the good
cool.
and the bad
Right.
of when y'all walked in the room and all
So
that.
they have us 5 families in this big room, and these social workers, I guess is what we would call them, were in another room with the babies, and we were just waiting for them to bring the babies out.
Okay.
And I remember when the social worker walked in holding her, and I recognized her face from the picture.
That's awesome.
And if I could just show you all the videos, it was such an emotional moment for me. As soon as I got her in my arms, I just started crying, and I just held her really close, and she was just trying to look around because she's a baby, you know. But yeah, that's a pretty special moment.
Yeah.
The other really special moment, I'm probably skipping ahead. You want me to
go.
stay with when we first
We'll
got
come
her?
back to it
No.
if we need
Yeah.
to. That's good.
Is that we got to actually go to her orphanage and meet her foster mother.
Oh, wow.
We found out while we were there that she stayed with her birth mom for a whole month. Her mom tried to keep her. And I believe that was also an answer to prayer. She kept her for a month. That's unheard of. So she got to have some attachment time with her mom.
Okay.
And then she was only in that orphanage for 1 month, which was a time I prayed over. I didn't know how long she would be there, but I remember praying that God would put just one woman who would do those things we know create healthy attachment. Look her in the eye, pick her up and hold her, tend to her, you know, when she had needs, and that God would allow her to have attachment forming. But I don't know what happened in that orphanage, except that she got a cold. And when she gets sick, she can be a little fussy. It got her kicked out of the orphanage. So they put her in foster care.
Wow.
And this one woman that we prayed for, we got to meet her. And I promise you, she was exactly what we prayed for. We didn't get a translator to help us communicate, but we could watch them together. And she held her and she looked her in the eye, and she was a joyful person. She really was.
Yeah.
The other foster moms in the room with us that day, they didn't look joyful. And it made me a little bit sad. Maybe it was something cultural. I don't know what was going on, but like this lady was so full of joy and energy and just what Jenna Hope needed. So those are my 2 of my big special moments over there.
So you talked about 2 attachments she had with her birth mom and for a brief period, and then the foster mom for a brief period. So, that she already knew about attachment, but maybe she knew about attachment because of your prayers that would be happening ahead of time.
Right, because it's not an automatic transfer. Right. It's important that they have some attachment before they're 1, and especially before they're 5. But just because they've had somebody to attach to, that is helpful. But it doesn't mean they automatically attach with you know, as their adoptive mom.
Yeah.
But I do remember carrying her around with me, like face to face all the time. You know those little carriers?
Yeah.
A lot of people put them in the carrier facing out so they can see. I put her facing me. It's like, we're here, you and me, close.
Well, you know, when I did fatherhood stuff, they say dads put them out
Okay.
so they can see the world, and moms put them like this.
Maybe that's it.
Well, yeah, maybe some of that. I know at least with our kids, it was age based, right? Like you had, like up until a certain age, you have to put them facing you.
Yeah,
Well, have to. Like you really can't put them facing out because they don't have, until they have the head control, they can't face
Right.
outward.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did a lot of outward facing with ours. But you know, we were there at the
Yeah.
my wife gave birth to him. So
and yeah, I was going to say, you weren't making up for lost time.
No.
Kind of,
Right,
yeah.
Right.
exactly. I unfortunately, what I learned about myself was I was being more intentional with Jenna Hope, and I thought these are things I should be doing with my sons. Not that we weren't having healthy attachment with them; it came naturally. But there were things like with Jenna Hope. If I tucked her in at night, I said certain things to her. Like I remember when she was probably 5 or 6, saying, "Even when we are apart, we're always together in heart." And I got that I made it up. It was from a Chinese fairy tale about adoption. And in the story, this king and this queen discovered they had a red ribbon coming out of their heart and they didn't know where it was going. So they follow the string that's attached to their heart. And eventually, I mean, like on the other side of the world, they find there's a baby attached. And the idea was that even though they were apart, they were still attached. And so I would say that to her at night, knowing she probably needed to actually hear the words explicitly spoken to her. And I was like, you know what? All kids need this. So I started doing that.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking like that, you were telling that story, that's what went through my mind. I was like, I wonder why we don't talk more about that with birth parents. It is talked to about with because there's this sense of, okay, there may be a lack of ability to attach because of circumstantially for in adoption cases. But wow, it's necessary. It's not, we don't need to assume because there's a birth thing that attachment is happening.
That's right.
Why do we assume that sometimes? There's things you can do that make a difference.
Interestingly, what promotes that healthy attachment are the most basic parenting things, right? Just when your baby cries, you go get them and you pick them up and you feed them and talk nice. You know? There was a book in the 70s, I haven't read it, but it was called The Good Enough Mom. No mom wants to be just good enough, right? The ones that I know don't want to, but that's all it takes for healthy attachment.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right. Basic stuff.
So tell us more. 2 weeks in China. What'd you do those 2 weeks?
Well, like I said, we went from place to place signing papers.
Okay.
We got sworn in the consulate
Always
at the end
with
of our
Jenna
visit.
Hope with you?
Always.
Okay.
Always. We had a little doctor's visit, almost like her exit exam, to make sure she was healthy.
Okay.
Just little things like that. We did a little bit of tourism. It was a lot of fun.
As much
We
as you
enjoyed
can
it.
with what? Was she 2 months old? Or is that
She was 11 months old.
11 months old?
However,
okay. Somewhere.
Developmentally, she was like a 5 or 6 month old.
Okay.
She was having trouble sitting up on her own and that kind of thing. Yeah, but she cried. Can I just say she cried? I would like, for the record, for it to be known that my daughter cried. Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, too, this was your first girl, too.
It was our first girl after
had
3 boys, our
Yeah,
biological
3 boys,
sons. That's right. First
How cool
girl.
is that?
We had, for 2 weeks, we put her in a new dress every day.
That sounds about right.
Something
That
pink.
sounds about right. Yeah.
Was there a moment, and it can be at any point really, where you obviously you were attached to her right away, right? Was there a moment that you remember where you felt like that attachment was starting to be returned from her?
So I feel like it was there all along.
Really?
And there's a really cool story. After our we're on a trip home. We are traveling from the other side of the world home. And we're finally on the last leg of the trip to get to Birmingham, from somewhere in New Jersey to Birmingham. And Jenna Hope and I are in this little 2-seater on one side of the aisle, and on the other side is just one seat. And there's a gentleman over there in a suit. You remember those little planes?
No, I haven't been on a plane that small, and that just does not work for me.
It sounds like a weed eater.
Yeah. No. Sorry, go ahead.
I understand your concern.
Yeah.
But I know, and so I'm not always this nosy, but sometimes I am. But he was reading a book, and I just kept glancing across to see what he was reading, and I could tell it was something about psychology, but I knew if I kept looking, he's eventually going to correct me.
Yeah.
So I quit, and I was just hanging out with Jenna Hope, but we landed and we were standing up getting our luggage and whatnot. And that man, he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Ma'am, did you adopt this little girl?" I said, "Yes. In fact, we're just getting home from China right now." And he said, "Well, I've been watching y'all. She's attached to you already."
Oh, that's awesome. Wow.
Like, he observed it, and he just saw that she was touching my face and looking me in the eye and laying on me and just responding and engaging with me in an attached way.
He was a psychologist.
He was a psychologist.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
I know. And I just love
that.
that even that the Lord arranged for him to be sitting there and that he would speak to me
and for
say
someone
that.
to say that to, like, after praying for all that stuff for 7 years, for
Pretty
someone to
special.
tell you, like, as soon as you're home on American soil,
American
it's like,
soil.
hey, by the way, that kid you just brought home from another country is like knows you, trusts you. Yeah.
Pretty cool confirmation.
As we listen to your story, I'm reminded of what some people are talking about now, about our attachment and our ability to detach, not just with other people, but with God too. Mm-hmm. And that actually in salvation, it's being reattached to God. First, we were created in his image, but because of sin, we were detached from him, as it were, and then when we are forgiven, and I think, Tina, you described it a little bit like that forgiveness of sins, that moment when we understand that we are being reattached, is we get detached from our previous life.
That's right.
From that life
From sin and the world.
led by ourselves to a new life of attachment. And so when you think about attachment and with children, and you think about it in context of your relationship with God, now I understand even more as I think through that. And more people are actually, both counselors and also theologians and pastors are starting to say, let's take a look at that, because that's really, that attachment is what makes the difference in your life. It's the attachments that make the changes in your life. And so without attachment, you just kind of wander off on your own. You're detached from other people. You're detached from God himself. But then that coming home, as it were, you coming home to now being reattached to the God who created you in his image to start with, and it really is a coming home. So I sent you guys a song that the Booth brothers, and I know y'all are just big Southern gospel fans and all that kind of stuff, but the song is, When I Met the Master, Now I Belong to Him. And I got to tell you, not just because it was a Southern gospel song, but when I heard those words and I was thinking about the attachment, now I belong to Him. And so we use the word attachments, and really it's belonging. I think there's a word in the in Hebrew that I'm certainly not a Hebrew scholar, but hesed, I believe is how it's pronounced. Am I saying that right?
Something like that.
Something like that. And it's a word that has to do with belonging. And it talks about, when it says love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, it's really attachment love.
That's right.
Be attached to him. Be attached to God. Connect with him on heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that's what Jenna Hope did with you, was kind of like she connected and you connected with her. Right. And it's just a beautiful symbolism of what God does with us.
Well, I think one of the things that strikes me kind of about that metaphor is, like, if you look at Jenna Hope in that moment, like when, just use the example of when, the guy sees the two of you on the plane, and how she's responding in that moment is, of course, she's 11 months old. She can't explain what she feels, but she knows that, like, she knows she's experiencing peace, and that this is where, like, this is where I belong. Like, she doesn't even know to say this is my mom, but but she knows this is, like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I feel safe. And God makes us feel, our relationship with Jesus makes us feel that exact same way, or at least makes me feel that exact same way, almost. And what I mean is, I can't always explain it. Like, if someone asks me, someone who maybe, thinks belief in God is silly or something like that, asks me, why in the world would you do something? Like, why in the world would you fall into something? People like to say it's, kind of like a trap or whatever. I just can't explain, like, peace that he gives that no one else can give. Like, feeling like that this is exactly what I need. Jenna Hope had that feeling. This is exactly what she knew innately. That was exactly what she needed. And that's the way his attachment to him feels to me. almost difficult to explain, but I just know that there's a peace there that I can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. You know, I was thinking today about my own religious background, and I'm grateful for the people who introduced me to Jesus. Yeah. But, you know, I didn't understand attachment to him because I don't think I was taught that. Wow. I was taught obey him, do what he says, embrace his forgiveness. But the idea of being attached to him, in fact, as I grew up, I would worry about if I died tonight, would I go to heaven? You know, did I really belong to him? In other words, that was always a question. It was always in question. Do I belong to him? Wow. You know, and not because other people told me I didn't or because I was living some kind of wild life. I was 19 years old, man and lady, when that happened to me, and this was the moment. I'm a sophomore in my sophomore year, almost my junior year of college. I'm in Columbus, Georgia. I'm renting a room from a couple, and I was in the middle of reading about people who felt that they were attached to God in so many ways. And I realized I didn't have that. I'm describing it now in terms that I didn't know then. But I looked in the mirror one night, and I was praying, not praying to myself, but when I looked in the mirror and I said these words, God, I don't know about all of this, but all I know is I want everything you have to offer to me. And it was in that moment, guys, in that moment, that I never since that time have ever wondered whether I belonged to him. It changed my life. And it was at that moment it was that moment when I understood what you're describing, Eric. I was 19. I was passionate about following Jesus prior to that, but I did not understand attachment until that moment. And I know from that day forward, I've been cool.
I think about it too in terms of our relationships with particularly like close ones, maybe like a spouse or your children or something like that. The attachment that you feel there, it's not because it doesn't always is not always having to be expressed through like verbal communication.
That's right.
It's so much of it I can be around my wife and even Eric too. We've spent so much time together where you don't really have to say a lot. That's sometimes true. To understand how that person is reacting to the situation, maybe even how it makes them feel and that sort of thing. I think about that with my wife too. Like, sometimes you don't always have to say a lot, or even with my kids. Like, even if Nate, we told that story about how he said what he said, but like him just even putting his hand on your shoulder.
That's plenty.
Yeah. And so I think about that sometimes too, with how that's supposed to be the way it is our relationship with the Father as well. It's not just, I think so many times I get caught up thinking that I have to be praying all the time in order to
be attached.
Or just because like I've got to like feel like that's our relationship is me talking and me praying and all stuff, whatever. And it's not just that. That's it's just being in his presence because he knows how I'm responding to certain situations, and I know the truth about what he feels about me and what But sometimes we just have to go. We have to go back to that and remember that it is that relationship that we have with him. We want it to be on that same level, and I don't want to just be talking to him like I want to talk to him all the time, but I don't want to just be running my mouth. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So I think some of that like nonverbal stuff that we see in like our relationships with people here so much, I feel like that's really important for understanding it as well. Knowing in those moments when we're quiet that he's also there with us.
So are we describing both natural attachment and supernatural attachment?
Yeah.
That's what we're describing, and both of them are crazy important and so satisfying and rewarding and fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
I like that you brought up the idea that we've been focusing on attachment with parents and children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when we get married, that same process happens.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I was thinking about in John 1, it talks about three different things. And basically it's 3 ways you can become part of a family. Mm-hmm. And it's reflected that it could be birth or a father's will, which would be adoption, or then this marriage. So, but I was thinking about, you can be born into the family, adopted into the family, or you marry into the family. But all three have this beautiful attachment. You know, in marriage, we start calling it a different word. We call it intimacy, and I mean emotional connection. Yeah. And it's pretty cool that the Lord recognized all of that and offers all of that to us. And for me, while I very much feel attached to God as my father, I also with Christ, I feel that attachment as a bride and bridegroom. And then it takes on a slightly different feel, but for some reason, that's just another way for me to look at it that means a whole lot. Yeah. Like a life-changing, kind of like your moment, like realizing that he was my bridegroom. Yeah. And you know, when you were talking about the idea that it doesn't even have to be something that's spoken, when we talk in counseling about intimacy having different levels, you can, you know, have all different levels of intimacy with different people in your life. But when you get to that, I call it in the basement, like you're really, you know each other well. And you, then what happens is you know each other so well that you don't even have to say anything. You just like you described, like I know what he's thinking about that right now. I can look at your face and know what you're feeling about this. Right. That's a really deep level of connection. Yeah.
And I was wandering, I was there, then I met the Master. Now I belong to him. It happens between parents and children. It happens between married folks. It happens between friends. Yeah. I've thought about the sense of attachment to Jesus as a friend. He said, I don't call you servants. I call you friends. I want to be attached to you as a friend. I didn't know that growing up. I know it now. And boy, it's great. And you're right. Prayer is just as much listening as it is talking.
Yeah. And I love what you said, because we kind of talk about how you need to have a breadth of relationships in your life for like that because I can't be all things to someone, right? Like I can't be, someone can't be all things for me, right? But spiritually, he is there to be all things for us, and he can be all of that for us. And I think that's such a cool thing to realize, is that we're dependent upon, you know, all of these roles being filled in our lives from other people, but in that realm and that.
Well, you're talking.
He's all.
Dad mentioned kind of like natural attachment and supernatural attachment. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Is where, you know, naturally you want brother and, you know, and spouse and to have you know with that attachment with parents and then friends, and but then on the supernatural side, that's what makes, you know, I mean that's who he is all of those and more.
How about a shout out to Jenna Hope?
Well, I would like to say something about that. Please. She just went off to college this past August. This is the longest we've ever been apart from each other since we've been together.
How about that?
You know, and of course I was curious to see how she handled that transition, because while we're, you know, it's not are you attached, yes or no, it's how secure is this attachment. That's right. So it's never perfect and it's constantly changing. But with her going off to college, I just was watching and being observant, and she has handled it so well. Yeah. But imagine what that means for her to be away from us like that for the first time now. Right. And attaching to new people, like you're saying, bringing new people into her life, and she's done it, and she's done it really well. We've just been so proud of how she's done that. I miss her like crazy.
Yeah, I bet.
No, I'm telling myself, even when we are apart, we're always together.
This is you comforting yourself now,
right? That's right.
Yeah. I'll say, as a pastor's kid, you know, I've been the subject of many of these type, not podcasts, but sermons, whatever. So, Jenna Hope, thank you for letting us talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. She can probably relate to you, actually. I have to remind myself it is her story.
Yeah.
I'm involved, but it's her story.
Yeah, we're grateful for that story.
Thank you,
really awesome.
Tina. It was so good
pleasure.
to hear it, and it's really kind of cool to think about our producer getting to be a part of that story too, and being attached to her. And he probably has his own story about.
Can I tell you something about the picture we got of her in the mail that day when they said, "Do you want this child?" Yeah. Y'all. So this producer, my husband, has this little thing he can do with his mouth that none of us can do. And it's just this funny little face that he makes. And we call it Chris lips.
Mm-hmm. Chris lips.
Yes. And I know that sounds funny, but it's this funny thing he does with his mouth. When we got the pictures of Jenna Hope, there were 2 pictures. And in one, of course, I told you she was dressed like an Eskimo. I was like, ooh, that's an answer to prayer. In the other one, she's doing Chris lips.
Oh, no.
Not even kidding. At like 10 months of age, she could do with it. And I was like, she's already part of the family.
That's right. That's it. That's awesome.
We have to get those Chris lips on camera at some point, probably.
He's shaking his head, so we'll see.
He says no.
I don't know if we can dig that out or not. It's all right if we can't, Chris. Someday. Yeah. But thank you so much for joining us for
My
this.
pleasure.
It's
Always
been a
glad
blast.
to
It's
talk
been a
about
blast.
that.
Like I mentioned at the start, make sure you go out to Tina's website, tinasumpter.com. You can visit us at preacherinthehat.com. And so, as always, for Derek, Steve, Chris behind the cameras, and our special guest, his wife, Tina, I'm Eric. This has been Preacher in the Hat. We'll see you next time.